My heart raced when our eyes met among the mirrors in that mall bathroom. 27 years in construction taught me how to build walls, but none of them were strong enough to hold what I felt in that moment. I'm Marcus, 49 years old, a site supervisor in Portland. My life was always defined by getting things done. Projects, deadlines, concrete, and steel. After my divorce 3 years ago, I dove even deeper into work, using my solitary routine as a way to avoid dealing with issues I'd kept quiet since my teens. Hit like if you've ever felt that instant connection with someone who seems to break through all your defenses. I live in a modest apartment downtown, with a view of the Willamette River. Mornings start early with black coffee and a low soundtrack of classic jazz. The days follow a routine. I coordinate work crews on construction sites Monday through Friday, check out project plans, and solve structural issues. At night, I eat dinner alone while watching documentaries on architecture or history. Weekends are for home repairs, walks in the park, and occasionally a beer at the corner bar where I know everyone by name, but nobody really knows me. There's something comforting about predictability, in controlled loneliness, in expectations that are never challenged. It was on an ordinary Tuesday that everything changed. I stopped by Riverside Mall during lunch to buy a birthday gift for my sister. After picking out a silk scarf at a department store, I decided to use the bathroom before heading back to work. The place was nearly empty, except for a man washing his hands. Alex, as I later learned, was 43 years old, a history professor at the local university. He had salt and pepper hair at his temples, wore subtle framed glasses, and carried himself in a way that showed years spent leaning over books. "Sorry," he said when he bumped into me as he left. His gaze held mine a second longer than usual. It would have been just another anonymous encounter if it weren't for the book that fell from his coat pocket, a biography of Harvey Milk. When I handed it back, our fingers brushed briefly. "Do you know him?" he asked, noticing my gaze on the title. "Name's all I know," I replied, feeling an unexpected urge to keep the conversation going. "I'm giving a talk about him tomorrow at the community center. It's about the LGBTQ movement in American politics." There was something in the way he spoke, with contained passion and calm intelligence, that made me accept the flyer he offered. We exchanged a few words about architecture. He was writing an article on inclusive urban spaces, and then said goodbye. I went back to work restless, the flyer weighing in my pocket like it was made of lead. 2 days later, we met by chance at the cafe near the community center. Not really. I had been waiting for him. Our initial talks flowed surprisingly easily. He talked about his students and his research projects. I shared stories from construction sites and the buildings I'd helped build. A mutual respect formed. He valued my practical knowledge, and I admired his erudition. We began meeting weekly at the same cafe. We discussed books. He lent me some that changed my perspective, architecture, and occasionally politics. We never talked about relationships or our past. There was an unspoken agreement to not cross certain boundaries. Until the stormy night. A torrential downpour caught us as we left a photography exhibit he invited me to. My apartment was nearby, so I offered shelter until the rain eased. As we dried our coats, I noticed the growing unease between us, not because of the silence, but because of all the things we hadn't been saying for weeks. "Why did you come to my talk that day?" he suddenly asked, as I poured red wine for both of us. That question unleashed a flood inside me. I had internal conflicts I'd never voiced, desires I'd repressed for decades, an identity I hadn't even been brave enough to name. And Alex seemed to understand it all without judgment. The wine turned his lips a deep red as he waited for my response. I set the glass on the coffee table and sank into an old leather armchair that I'd inherited from my father. Outside the apartment window, lightning occasionally lit up the river, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "I wanted to understand," I finally replied, "this part of me that I'd always locked away." Alex moved closer, sitting on the arm of my chair. His scent, a mix of old books, coffee, and something uniquely his, completely enveloped me. "So, what do you understand so far?" he asked, his low voice nearly drowned out by the sound of the rain. My eyes met his. There was so much to say, stories I'd never shared, feelings I'd suppressed since I was 16 when I first got that knot in my throat watching the swimming team captain leave the pool, that I built an entire life avoiding who I really am. The silence between us grew heavy, full of possibilities. Alex rested his hand on my shoulder, a simple touch that sent electric waves through my body. "We're more than our omissions, Marcus," he said. He got up, walking over to the shelf where I kept my plants, small succulents that managed to survive my irregular care. "Do you know why I always carry that biography with me?" he he asked, touching the fleshy leaves of a tiny cactus. Because Milk once said something that kept me alive through tough times. Hope never stays silent. I watched his long fingers caress the plants, imagining those same fingers running over my face, my neck. The temperature in the apartment felt like it had risen a few degrees. Can hope really wait 50 years? I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. He turned, smiling to the side. It waits as long as it needs to. Then, a particularly loud thunderclap made the lights flicker and go out. We stayed in the dim light, illuminated only by occasional lightning and the city lights filtering in through the window. I've got candles somewhere, I murmured, getting up. No need, Alex said, his voice surprisingly close. I didn't see him move in the darkness, but suddenly he was there, just inches away, his warm breath on my face, his eyes reflecting the far-off city lights. May I? He asked simply. I didn't reply with words. My hand found his face in the dim light, tracing the line of his jaw with my thumb. Years of hesitation, pretense, and denial all melted away the moment our lips met. The kiss started tentatively, as if we both feared breaking something fragile. His lips were soft against mine, tasting of wine and promise. Then, as if a dam had burst, tenderness gave way to urgency. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, while his roamed over my back, my shoulders, gripping the fabric of my shirt. Between gasping kisses he whispered against my skin, "How long?" "Too long," I replied, slowly leading him down the hallway to the bedroom. Our path was interrupted several times, pressed against the hallway wall where his lips traced paths along my neck, and near the bedroom door where trembling fingers began to unbutton and explore freshly exposed skin. In the bedroom, the bluish light of lightning revealed flashes of expression, desire, vulnerability, astonishment. Every piece of clothing removed felt like a layer of disguise being stripped away. When we finally stood barrier-free, I felt something beyond sexual desire, a connection that transcended touch, as if something inside me had finally found its place in the universe. Alex guided me to the bed with the confidence of someone who knows the way even in the dark. His hands seemed to be everywhere at once, finding sensitive spots I didn't even know existed. Under his touch, my body responded like an instrument, making sounds I never thought possible. "You're beautiful," he murmured against my stomach, his unshaven beard creating a delightful friction against my sensitive skin. My response dissolved into a moan as his lips moved further down, finding parts of me that had never been touched with such reverence. The pleasure built like a wave, starting at my toes and rising inexorably until it swallowed any coherent thought. We switched positions fluidly, like dancers who intuitively know each other's moves. Now it was my turn to explore, to map every inch of his skin with my lips and tongue, to discover what made him sigh, moan, and grip the sheets. The storm outside mirrored the tumult inside the room, intense, wild, primal. We lost track of time, entwined in each other, exploring and rediscovering patterns of pleasure that brought us closer and closer to the edge. When we finally reached that climax together, it was as if all the city lights had flooded the room, exploding behind closed eyelids. Afterwards, lying side by side, breathless and sweaty, he traced imaginary patterns on my chest. The rain had eased, leaving only a gentle drumming against the window. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and tenderness. I turned to face him. That question carried so many meanings beyond the two simple words. Was I really okay with myself? With what we'd just done? With what it all meant? "For the first time in a long time," I replied, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. "Yes, I'm perfectly fine." He smiled, and that smile held universes. We fell asleep, intertwined, to the sound of the rain gently falling outside, like a blessing. I woke up before him, with the first rays of sunlight filtering in through the slightly open curtains. For a few moments I watched his relaxed, sleeping face, the softened expression lines, his eyelashes casting delicate shadows on his cheeks, his deep, steady breathing. A feeling of peace washed over me, mixed with something I recognized after a few moments of reflection as gratitude. I got up quietly and went to the kitchen to make coffee. As the water boiled, I leaned against the counter and let the events of the previous night flood my mind. I didn't feel guilt or shame, feelings I always thought would accompany this moment. Instead, I experienced a surprising clarity, as if a cloudy filter had been lifted from my view of the world. The smell of freshly brewed coffee must have woken Alex, because soon, I heard his barefoot steps in the hallway. He appeared at the kitchen doorway, wearing only his pants, his hair tousled, and a shy smile on his lips. "Good morning," he said, accepting the cup I offered. "Good morning," I replied, letting my eyes wander over his bare chest without hiding the pleasure I felt seeing it. We stayed silent for a few minutes, drinking our coffee and exchanging glances like teenagers. He was the first to speak. "I'm trying to come up with the perfect question for this moment, but everything I think of sounds banal or pretentious." I laughed softly. "Try anyway." He set his cup on the counter and moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "What happens now, Marcus?" The question hung between us, full of implications. It wasn't just about that morning or about the two of us. It was about a whole life rethought, about identity and authenticity. Honestly, I don't know. I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. But for the first time, I want to find out. We spent the rest of the morning talking, really talking, seated at the kitchen table. I told him about Jimmy, my best friend during my adolescence, and that stolen kiss in the locker room after gym class, about the panic that made me avoid him for the rest of high school. I talked about my marriage with Elaine, a wonderful woman who deserved someone who could love her completely. About years spent trying to convince myself it was just a phase, a curiosity, anything other than who I really was. Alex shared his own journey, from coming out at 19, to the initial rejection by his conservative parents that eventually turned into reluctant acceptance, his past relationships, including an engagement that broke and left him devastated for nearly 2 years. After that, I closed myself off, he confessed. I dove into work and research, until that day at the mall. I smiled remembering our first encounter, which now felt like it happened in a different life. "Did you know? That day? Did you sense it?" I asked. He tilted his head, considering. "I didn't know, but I hoped. There's something in the eyes of someone who lives hidden, a recognition, a spark. I saw that in you." His words hit me hard. The idea that he had seen through the walls I'd built so carefully was both terrifying and liberating. "And now?" I asked, echoing his earlier question. Alex stretched out his hand over the table, gently touching my face. "Now you decide what you want to build. Not walls, but bridges." That afternoon, when we finally left the apartment to have lunch at a small Italian restaurant down the block, I felt like I was stepping into a completely new world. The same streets, the same buildings, the same sky washed by the previous night's rain, but everything seemed different through the eyes of a man who was finally starting to know himself. Alex walked beside me, his arm occasionally brushing against mine, sending little electric shocks through my skin. I watched his profile as he animatedly talked about a book he was reading, the way his eyes lit up and his hands gestured to emphasize key points. I felt a wave of affection so intense that it nearly made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. "What's up?" he asked, noticing my fixed gaze. "Nothing," I replied with a smile. "I'm just watching you." His expression softened with understanding. At the restaurant, seated at a corner table with a checkered tablecloth and a decorative candle in the center, we continued our conversation, now drifting to lighter topics. Favorite movies, dream vacations, and little odd habits we never admitted to anyone. When our hands briefly met on the table, I felt a moment of hesitation, that automatic reflex to pull back and look around to see if anyone was watching. Alex noticed and waited patiently, his eyes showing understanding without judgment. I took a deep breath and let my fingers remain intertwined with his, a small gesture that represented a giant step. The following weeks unfolded like pages in a book I had always wanted to read, but never had the courage to. Alex and I developed a routine that alternated between his cozy, book-filled apartment and my more minimalist space overlooking the river. Each new meeting revealed more layers of each other, like archaeologists carefully unearthing long-buried treasures. On one particularly sunny Sunday morning, after a night where we explored new realms of intimacy that left me both exhausted and more alive than ever before, I realized I was at a crossroads. "I've got a talk in Seattle next week," Alex said as we prepared breakfast together in my kitchen. He was stirring eggs in the pan while I chopped fresh fruit. "It's a conference about LGBTQ history in the Pacific Northwest. I'll be away for 5 days." I felt an unexpected tightness in my chest at the thought of nearly a week without him. Having lived decades in self-imposed solitude, the intensity of that reaction surprised me. "You should come with me," he suggested casually, as if he hadn't just thrown out a proposal that would fundamentally change our dynamic. Silence fell between us as the weight of the invitation hung in the air. It wasn't just a trip, it was a step towards something more defined, more public. I left the question unfinished, unable to find the right word. Alex turned off the stove and faced me, his eyes reflecting a mix of hope and understanding. As my partner, Marcus. As the man who's changing my life in ways I never imagined possible. His straightforward honesty always disarmed me. I set the knife on the cutting board and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the implications of that invitation sink in. "I do want to," I finally replied, opening my eyes to meet his attentive gaze. "But I'm scared." "I know," he said simply, stepping closer to touch my face. "And it's okay. We don't need to label or announce anything to anyone. I just thought maybe you'd like to see Seattle with me." The kindness in his approach, the way he offered possibilities without any pressure, was one of the qualities that attracted me to him the most. "I've never been to the Space Needle," I admitted with a half smile. His face lit up. "Then that's a crime that needs to be remedied." As we ate our breakfast on the porch, we discussed the details of the trip. Part of me still hesitated, worried about what it would mean to be seen as a couple in public, especially at an academic event where Alex knew so many people. But another part, growing stronger each day, longed for that shared experience. "I'll need to talk to Howard about taking a few days off," I mentioned, referring to the owner of the construction company where I worked. "We just wrapped up the community center project, so maybe it's a good time." Alex nodded, chewing on a piece of toast. "The weather should be nice in Seattle this time of year. We could explore Pike Place after the talks, maybe even take a ferry to Bainbridge Island." As he excitedly outlined plans, I watched the way his eyes sparkled when talking about the future. Our future, even if it was just for the next few days. I realized I was falling in love with this man, not just because of the intense nights or deep conversations, but because of simple moments like this, sharing breakfast and dreaming about little adventures together. On Monday, when I asked for the days off, Howard gave me a curious look. "Seattle? You never take time off, Marcus. What's in Seattle that's finally caught your interest?" I hesitated for just a moment before answering. "A friend is giving a talk there. I thought I'd go along, see the city." It wasn't a lie, but omitting the true nature of the relationship weighed on me in a surprising way. For the first time, I felt ashamed not of who I was, but of my reluctance to be honest about it. Howard smiled and gave me a pat on the shoulder. "It's about time, man. You work too hard. Enjoy it." In the days leading up to our departure, a restlessness grew inside me. Not about the trip itself, but about what it represented. One night, while I was packing clothes into a small suitcase, I confessed my fears to Alex over the phone. "What if we run into someone I know? What if your colleagues start asking questions? What if I don't fit into that academic world?" His gentle laugh warmed my ear. "Marcus, relax. First, Portland isn't exactly next door to Seattle. Second, my colleagues are more interested in debates about 20th century identity politics than in our personal lives. And third, you built skyscrapers. I doubt a few lectures on queer history could intimidate you." His logic momentarily calmed me, but the core of my anxiety remained. "I don't want to embarrass you," I finally admitted in a quiet voice. The silence on the other end of the line was brief but meaningful. When Alex spoke again, his voice carrying an emotion that caught me off guard. "Marcus Cooper, the only way you could embarrass me would be by denying who you are, who we are together. And based on the last 2 months, I'm confident that won't happen." His words hit me with strength and clarity, like a ray of sunshine breaking through heavy clouds. The trip wasn't about Seattle or lectures, or even about being seen as a couple. It was about choosing authenticity after decades of pretense. On the morning of our departure, I met Alex at the train station with a renewed sense of determination. He smiled when he saw me, that smile still sending waves of warmth through my body, even after weeks of intimacy. "Ready?" he asked, adjusting the strap of his leather bag on his shoulder. "Ready," I replied, and this time, I truly was. The train ride to Seattle passed by breathtaking landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. Sitting side by side, sometimes chatting animatedly, sometimes enjoying that comfortable silence that only exists between people who genuinely appreciate each other's company, I felt my anxiety ease. When my hand found his on the chair armrest, I didn't let go even when the attendant passed by, offering drinks. In Seattle, we stayed at a boutique hotel downtown, not far from the university where the conference was held. Our room had a view of the city skyline, with the Space Needle rising majestically against a blue-gray sky. After we dropped off our bags, Alex took me for an impromptu walk around the neighborhood. "The first talk is tomorrow morning," he explained, intertwining his fingers with mine as we walked. "We have the rest of the day to start exploring." We visited independent bookstores, cafes with tattooed baristas sporting colorful hair, and small art galleries hidden in alleys. In each place, I watched how naturally Alex interacted with everyone, never hesitating to introduce me as his partner. The term still sounded new to my ears, but each time I heard it, it felt more right. The next morning, I sat in the front row of the university auditorium, watching Alex speak passionately about the history of the LGBTQ movement in port cities. His eloquence, his deep knowledge, and the way he answered questions with intelligence and humor all increased my admiration for him. During the coffee break, I was introduced to several colleagues and students who surrounded him with questions and compliments. "So you're the famous Marcus," commented a middle-aged professor, smiling warmly. "Alex won't stop talking about you." I blushed slightly, but maintained eye contact. "I hope it's all good things." "The best," she assured me. "It's refreshing to see you so happy." That simple observation stayed with me for the rest of the day. The idea that I, Marcus Cooper, a man who had spent his whole life hiding a fundamental part of himself, could be the source of someone's happiness, that was revolutionary. The 5 days in Seattle flew by, filled with fascinating lectures, dinners in cozy seaside restaurants, and intense nights in our hotel room. We visited the Space Needle at sunset, took a ferry ride to Bainbridge Island on an especially bright afternoon, and strolled hand-in-hand through Pike Place Market, sampling treats and buying souvenirs. On our last night, seated on a bench at the waterfront watching the city lights reflect in the dark bay waters, Alex turned to me with a serious expression. "When we get back to Portland tomorrow," he began, his voice merging with the soft sound of the waves, "things need to be different." My heart raced. "Different how?" He took my hands in his. "I can't go back to what we had before. Secret meetings, half-truths to friends and colleagues. I understand your hesitations, Marcus, and I respect your process, but I need to know that we're moving in the same direction." The seriousness in his eyes told me that this wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. I took a deep breath, letting the salty sea air fill my lungs. "It took me almost 50 years to find myself, Alex," I replied, squeezing his hands. "I'm not going to lose myself again. When we get back, I'm going to tell Howard, my sister, and the few friends I have. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is," he finished, a smile lighting up his face. That night, our intimacy took on a different quality, not just passion, but a deeper connection, a silent commitment being sealed between our bodies and souls. Back in Portland, I kept my promise. The conversations were tough, some more than others. Howard surprised me with his immediate acceptance. I always suspected it. "You look at that professor in a way I've never seen you look at anyone." My sister needed some time, but eventually she invited me to dinner and made sure Alex came too. 6 months later, Alex moved into my apartment. We transformed the space together, his bookshelves now sharing space with my tools, his scholarly plants thriving alongside my succulents. At night, we sat on the porch watching the river, sometimes talking about the future, sometimes just existing together in the comfortable silence we built. If you're watching and you've identified with any part of my story, I want you to know that it's never too late to be who you truly are. It took me half a century to find the courage, but when I finally let the walls fall down, I discovered a whole world waiting on the other side, a world with Alex in it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now to follow more stories like this. And hit like if you believe everyone deserves to find their own path to authenticity, no matter when or how that journey begins. Because the truth is that some buildings, like some hearts, need to be deconstructed to be rebuilt stronger, more authentic, and finally whole.